Hey there, welcome to episode 72 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. We are recording today's show in the just past noon time frame of July 2nd, 2024. Happy Tuesday, or whatever day you're listening to this. Today we are going to talk about the GitHub. GitHub is a Microsoft-owned platform aimed mostly at developers, but not entirely. Let's get started. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you have access to the show notes, which should be in the episode description. They're not always displayed they're not always displayed well, and they're not always easily found, but hopefully you're able to do at least one of those. The show notes contain a few links, which will be relevant to today's episode, and a summary, which I will read to you now. Summary: if you are a software developer of any kind nowadays, you have heard of it, you probably use it, or something just like it. So let's talk about it. Well, now we know what it is, the GitHub. Quick rundown on the links. Our first three have been common in the last several episodes. Innovateforvegas.org is our homepage. It's our business website. We are a Nevada nonprofit corporation. So for the purposes of, existing on the internet, when you file your paperwork with the state, with the IRS for a 501, in our case, C3 determination, sometimes banks, financial institutions, other services, they would like to be able to find you online. So we do maintain something of a presence. The idea will be to feature more of our project work there as kind of a sandbox or demo spot. But we have some other domains and other ideas to try to get other people, our contributors, our civic volunteers, to showcase their work and to put some stuff out there so that people know what we're working on. We have our GitHub organization on github.com/innovateforvegas. And by the way, we spell out the word for, F-O-R, no spaces. So innovateforvegas.org homepage, github.com/innovateforvegas on GitHub. We have a project that we have been driving. We started off, we will hopefully get some more similar organization participation. So other leaders or sort of primary contributors, I suppose, people who are spending substantial amounts of time, hopefully will sort of join in on this. The Project ACT, which stands for Autonomous Cohort Transformation. We started talking about this and sort of got the ball rolling in October of 2022. The Code for America Brigade program was sunset in December of 2023. Our initial thoughts were helping organizations that were brigades at the time to transform into standalone independent organizations like Innovate for Vegas Foundation has always been. We never rejoined. Code for Vegas was initially part of Code for America. Code for Vegas Foundation was not. We renamed to Innovate for Vegas to be more inclusive for people who are not coders, a question that was actually raised. So innovators welcome. So the Project Act has now, there's still some transformation possibility. We haven't been focusing on that since now you're not a brigade anymore. So the transformation will take a different form perhaps, but we'll see what happens there. The first goal, though, is to connect people who are still working on civic volunteer projects, open source, community elevating, possibly with a municipal partner, etc. So Project ACT is also the Autonomous Cohort Tessellation. A tessellation is a mosaic, but I got the T in there. I get to use the same name. Project ACT will aim to will aim to promote or enable connection, communication, and collaboration, the 3 C's, between individuals and organizations, whether they're former brigades or just getting started, or maybe it's just one or two people who are not a formal business entity. They would like to spend some of their time on community elevation projects. And by connecting organizations across geographical boundaries using tools of modernity and some legacy, RDF figures into this, the resource description framework. The hope is that we will be able to make more effective use of volunteer time by helping people using technology rather than web searching and reading through lists. So we will hopefully use technology to connect people, organizations, projects, particular issues, and we'll see if we can't be more productive with fewer people and less oversight. Production by a street. Less oversight from a top-down organization. So this is from the ground up. From the ground up, not ground up. Sounds different. That's not what that is. I do have two additional links. One is the Git origin story. It's a fairly lengthy and detailed article, and it's funny because a couple of things mentioned in there are they're similar to my own experiences. Although I did not invent Git, and I am not globally famous for changing the software landscape, as is Linus Torvalds, or Linus Torvalds, depending on how he prefers to pronounce his name lately. I think he likes Linus. Linus Torvalds of Linux kernel fame came up with Git, and you can read that story. He was basically not happy with what he was using, CVS or whatever else came along. You can read the article. And then BitKeeper was the famous, I remember when this was happening. BitKeeper became untenable. So he said, I'm going to change the world again. Give me like a week or two. And in a story reminiscent of JavaScript, which I think was written in 10 days, Git was something Git version 1. You always have to remember that the first version of, it only took 10 days to write JavaScript. JavaScript is still changing today. So it wasn't finished in 10 days. But to write something usable in I think 5 or 8 days, whatever it was, you can read the article and check that out. But that's pretty impressive. There is a reason he is where he is. And Git has become sort of the de facto standard, and we'll get into that. And then about GitHub, it just points to their GitHub about page, github.com/about. If you have no idea what I'm talking about with GitHub or Git or anything, you can start there. And in the meantime, let us begin with first version control. So if you are not familiar, when one person works on something, whatever it is, it could be a recipe, it could be a car, it could be a painting, whatever it is. Changes over time are either self-evident, like you can pretty much see when you have sky painted on your painting and then you add some clouds, you can see that. So they may be self-evident. They may be a matter of personal recollection. Like, did I tighten all those nuts on the bolts in the engine? You'll remember that, hopefully. Or they're not really important. Like, it doesn't really matter if you added 1 pinch of salt or 2 to your recipe. It'll come out in the wash. So when one person is doing these things, keeping track of these is you might make a note. You might take some sort of take a moment to actually write things down, especially if you're changing a recipe or you're disassembling an engine block and you want to make sure you get all the parts in the right places. Sometimes they'll have a mat for that with the little sections to lay the parts on. If you are by yourself and you're working on things like this, it is not always, now of course it isn't less useful, but it's not always like the first thought. Or no, it wasn't always the first thought. And as an interviewee, one of my questions to ask of the interviewer for a while, it was, what do you use for version control? And sometimes they would say, we don't, or they would say, we just zip stuff up and put it in directories. And those were always red flags. So over the years, it has become only easier to use tools like Git, which we're going to talk more about, so that even one person could use something like Git or the equivalent. Nowadays, most of your Office suites like Google Docs or Office 365 or whatever it is, They will often display changes. You can view changes to a document, and you'll be able to see overstrike, strike through, I guess, or new changes, comments, all that. So the notions of revision control or version control are change control. These are not completely foreign to people, but unfortunately, GitHub and similar tools like this have a coder shine on them, which makes them scary, I suppose. When two or more people work on something, understanding change can be critical. Now, it's not as critical with 2 people as it is with 2,000, and I've worked in both situations, and it can be critical. Not only for coherent progress in general, so you should know, like, did you change this? Because my thing's not working anymore. You should know that, just so that you aren't wasting time undoing and redoing and breaking things and so on. But to understand a thing, whatever it is, so probably software, but it could be anything, understand a thing that this group of people might be releasing to the world. So knowing what is inside the box is extremely important. Now, software is the obvious example, which will make an appearance again and again throughout this episode. But generally speaking, if you're working on anything and there's a whole group of people, say you're working on, aircraft, and you're wondering if you tightened all those bolts on that door, you should have a log of it. And sometimes there is a log, and sometimes the log goes missing. The same goes for anything, any sort of maintenance, any new development. If you're an architect and you're designing a home for a big project, or even maybe for tract homes, and you have a design, you have different subcontractors, you have whoever the contractor is driving all this, you have different subcontractors, different supply chains for materials and so on. So knowing who worked on which, because there might be a problem with the solder joints on pipes or whatever it is. There's all kinds of cases where, as you have more and more people working on things, you should understand the development of something, the construction of something is essentially change. Every day it's a new version of a house, a car, a recipe. Perhaps you are brewing some beer at home. Perhaps you are growing some flowers in a garden. You should be able to track progress and take measurements, and each of those is a version. Now, you may not necessarily be storing your garden data in GitHub, but it's an example of how you could day over day. And if you see your flowers wilting, you can say, well, what happened yesterday? What has been changing recently? We forgot to water it in the last 5 days. Whoops. So knowing the path, whatever you're working on, is useful. It can be very useful. The watering the plant is a perfect example. If I'm supposed to water the plant, but then I say, hey, if I'm not here, can you water the plant to someone else? And then they say, sure, but then they don't know that I'm not here. So they see me one day, and then they don't really think about it, and they see me another day, and they're like, oh, okay, so I don't have to water the plant. Maybe 5 days have passed, and they just haven't kept track. So having these details helps with productivity, helps understand what you are releasing to the world. If somebody says, hey, you shipped me plants that were very dry, then I would look through and see, oh, we forgot to water them before we shipped them out. Knowing what you're sending to people, what you're shipping, what you are putting up in the air can be very, very important. So having this data in a structured way, the tools to manage it, knowing how to use them, these are all useful. And you don't even need to be a software developer to make use of tools like GitHub, strange as that sounds. Well, when it comes to software, we pretty much use text files, so they're just text. They're usually not graphics or visualizations or audio. Those come later. Those are sometimes called assets or Chrome. But the text files we write can be compared, merged, analyzed, and tracked to make sure that we all know what we're doing, mostly. We've come a long way, and today a tool called Git, which you may have heard about already, has reached that point where everybody uses it in one way or another, certainly in my field, and more people use it for other things. It is very easy to use Git. You can get a free account on GitHub, create your personal repository, your personal account. You get your username is your sort of like an organization. So mine is github.com/DanHugo, because Dan Hugo was already taken. So if you are a Letterman fan, you know the guy so nice to name me twice. That's me. So Dan Hugo on GitHub. It's my personal repository, and you can put on any kind of private repos on there and so on, and repositories. So I might say, hey, I want to keep track of all my recipes. So I create a recipe repository, and then I put my how to make different types of coffee as text files, as simply text with maybe some formatting commands like hashtags and asterisks. Before you know it, I have a reasonably readable, legible online tool. And then I say, oh, you know what? I wanted to update the notes on this. I found it better that I stir rather than shake the coffee beverage, because I want to be all 007 or whatever. So I make a change. I commit it with a comment, change the method of mixing in my comment. And then later, 10 years from now, I'll say, when did I change that? Oh, I can look and see when I changed my famous coffee recipe. So you can use these tools for anything. And it's unfortunate that some people fear these tools as being, oh, I'm not a coder. And we had the same thing with our organization. I'm not a coder, so Code for Vegas is not for me, right? Like, that's not what we were aiming for. It was the naming legacy of Code for America. So easily fixed. So we've come a long way, though. If it was the late 90s or even 2001, and you were using Visual SourceSafe. When was I using Visual SourceSafe? Was it? Yeah, it was 2001. No, it was 2003, 2002-ish. I was using Visual SourceSafe, which I'll get to in a moment. If you had to use Visual SourceSafe, I would say, well, yeah, okay. You don't want to use that. But now that the tools are around, and Git itself is not a joy to use as a command line tool, but there are tools like GitHub and GitLab and Bitkeeper and, no, not Bitkeeper. Bitkeeper is the bad one. Bitbucket. I always do that. Bitbucket, and there are a few other ones that make it graphically more pleasant with some hints about how to do things. They wrap additional features, which we'll get into a tiny bit here. And so it's pretty usable. And you have a GitHub client on your Android device, even though you can't check out because Android sucks, but you can't check out files. You can't do file system stuff. But the bottom line is for example, I used to add when I did my open mics, so I did 3 times, when I would write jokes, when I was preparing for my short path toward fame, which then took another turn away from fame, I used my text editor to jot down some ideas, and I would commit it to my GitHub joke list. And then when I was at the place, Wise Guys in downtown in the Arts District in Las Vegas, I think you had to be there like an hour and a half before the show started. So I had like an hour and a half to review. So I would just pull out my phone and I would look on GitHub and see where my jokes were. Like, what do I remember all of them and so on. So it was a convenient way to synchronize data and to note the change. If you wanted to remove something, you could see, when did I remove that joke? When did I move that one in the order? So very useful, totally free, completely approachable for the casual person. You do have to learn some of the basics. What does it mean to commit? What is a commit comment? Maybe a little bit more advanced would be branching. Tagging could be useful. Some of these features are available. When you're editing a Google Doc, you can tag a version, right? You can name a document revision, and so at that point, you can go back to it. So some of these things are there. Branching, it's a little bit complicated. Merging, a little bit more. Rebasing is not something that you would say, oh yeah, now rebase, it's piece of cake. Totally makes sense. But the fact is the tools are there, and Git has come so far. In fact, it is so widely used and so ubiquitous that it is really becoming the target of disdain, a need to replace it now. Like, we got to do something better. And in fairness, it has been around for 20 years. 19, I think it's 19. 2005, I think it was. So, yeah, Git could be easier to use. Easier to use to get started. And there are still some things, too many command line, like Command line's good. I'm fine with the command line, but there are too many like, how do I do that again? And that's the way it is. There's a whole book online. It's git-scm, I think, .org. If you just look for Git book, I think you'll find that. Or no, you'll find a project called Gitbook. Anyway, the documentation for Git is around. It's pretty dense. It's not a joy to read. So making it a little bit more accessible to first time, junior level might be a nice thing, but we'll see. Encourage people to use version control though. Don't make it scary. So my own history with version control, as I mentioned, my first experience was VSS, Visual Source Safe. When was this? Because actually in college and my first programming jobs, and so this was from 93 to, believe it or not, till 2000, probably 2 or 3. When I would work at places, they were using, what were we using? Oh, well, did I say Visual Source Safe? I've totally screwed up my entire personal timeline. My first experience was at Netscape using CVS. I did have some RCS. I did try RCS. I got to redo this part of my notes. This is crazy. I totally moved my Netscape timeline be after 2000, which it was not. About 1996, I think it was 1996. So they were using CVS, concurrent versioning system. They had concurrent versioning system running somewhere in the vast server farms of Netscape. And what they would do is they would auto mount, usually, NFS mount, if you like, network file system. They would mount the repository in a normal standard place, which was always M source. So /m/source. If you are a Mac person, it was a directory, a folder called M at the top of your file system. So back then it was a Finder on Mac OS. I can't remember what version even. It was a long time ago, 96. So the top, M, and then you'd go into M and you'd see SRC, source, M source. And so you could go in there and you could delete files. You could do all kinds of mayhem. And so the first thing that they would tell you when you're checking out your stuff, never CD M source. That means don't go into that directory and start deleting things. Don't check out a tree into the directory itself. You should always be in your own directory. So it was pretty cumbersome. Later, there would be pserver, which would help to alleviate that. So that was my first real sort of business input. This makes more sense because that was in 96 or so. I graduated from college in, 98, 97, 98, 96, 98. I haven't looked at my resume in a while. Whenever that was, and actually, to be perfectly honest, when I was at... See, now is the best time to recall these things after I wrote these notes out incorrectly. When I was at True Vision, they were using they were using MPW Projector, which was sort of RCS based, if I remember correctly. So Projector worked in the MPW Macintosh Programmers Workshop build environment for the Mac. So we used to build software for the True Vision products on the Mac, QuickTime and whatnot, QuickTime and other Mac OS services. So Projector, Code Warrior would come along, and I think it was Projector compatible. So yeah, Projector was probably, because before that, what did we use at Apple? I was in the Newton group. We never really had to deal with, did we? We must have. Anyway, so I was using like these weird tools that nobody, quote, nobody would remember. I don't know how I've totally blocked that out. It must have been so painful. The use of CVS is, this is cool. And I'll tell you exactly why in context of VSS. This is cool because it's concurrent. I can just check stuff out and make changes. And when I go to check it in, it'll say, you have a merge conflict, and then you can deal with it then. So they call it lazy locking. So when I was at Intel as a contractor, this is the first time I worked at Intel back in 2002 or 3. I was working on silicon validation of an ARM part, actually. And they were using VSS, Visual Source Safe. So not at all my first experience, but it was a seminal. This room full of people that are supposed to understand computers, they're doing pre-silicon validation, I should say. So these are chips that don't exist yet. So you're testing them in simulators, and you're running code on a big giant like cycle accurate emulator, etc. So fun times. And someone had checked something out in Visual Source Safe, and they had owned the lock on the checkout. And then they either went home or took a flight somewhere, who knows. So they checked it out, and that was it. So now nobody can check anything in. And it was like a root file that everybody had to deal with. So like, oh, I can't check anything. It may not have been one file, but their checkout was locked. And in this situation, you would try to hold the lock for as short a time as possible, because this happens. No one else in the lab, and we're talking, there were probably like 40 people, 50 people working on different projects. This was some common source base. Total mayhem. Everybody's upset. Like, why is this? Because VSS did not support lazy locking. So you would lock, do your stuff, check in your changes, whatnot, and then you'd release the lock and someone else could move on. So that serialized the whole thing, which could be a pain for anything more than two people. So, because you can't look over and go, do you have a lock? What do you unlock the thing? I got to check my stuff in. Now this got to be painful. So concurrent versioning system would try to work around this, because RCS, revision control system, was very similar. Concurrent versioning system said, okay, you don't get to lock it when you check out, but when you check in, you may break things. So you have to merge, you have to deal with it yourself. We're not going to prevent people from causing trouble. It's trouble that you will have to account for later. So kicking the painful can down the road, but it still worked okay. The M source thing was kind of a nightmare. And CVS itself is centralized, much as its successor, sort of its successor by popularity, Subversion. Subversion had a compatibility layer or some command compatibility. So you could check out and you could check in, and you could, what do they call it? Did they call it a commit or a push? I can't remember. So very similar to CVS. You could do concurrent versioning without the locks and all that. And it was good. SVN became the new CVS. And VSS was losing favor. I don't even know if it still exists anymore. And everything was good. And then Linus Torvalds came along and said, BitKeeper is cool because it's distributed, so people can commit their changes to their local repositories, and then we can sync them up later, because kernel development happens all over the world. And BitKeeper was being a jerk, so he said, okay, I'm gonna make a tool that works the way I need it to work. And Git was born, and very quickly. So it was launched in 2005 ish, and my first exposure to Git was at Jawbone. Were we using Git at? My first exposure to Git sort of was at Palm, but I wasn't really committing to the tree. I was really working on releases, I wasn't fiddling in the tree, so to speak. So I didn't really use GitHub, but it was more used on me. But my first interactions with with Git, were at Jawbone. So that was about 2000, somewhere in 2008, 2010, was it? I don't even remember anymore. Anyway, my first exposure to Git was somewhere in the 2008-10 timeframe. 2010-12, probably used it more. Eventually, when I would move to Phoenix, then I was using the VSS stuff. That was a throwback, like, ooh, this sucks. And I'm sorry. No, I had already moved back from Phoenix. But when I left Jawbone, what were we using? I was working on some other things. They were not using GitHub. I think there was some Subversion in there again. It wasn't. But anyway, when you started using Git, this is very confused because I really totally botched my note-taking. I completely moved things around in my memory. Probably, what would have been useful is if I had this as a document checked into Git, and I could view the history. Checked into any Subversion, CVS, RCS, VSS, anything could have helped me out here. But the bottom line is I've had exposure, I've had familiarity with Git since somewhere like, let's call it 2008, early days. Certainly used it at Jawbone whenever that was. And that was the first time I ran into some serious trouble. And one of my colleagues, Travis G., was like, I think Travis is a genius. And even he was like, oh, I think you have to do, like, we we're kind of stuck, or like, I think this should work. So it's still one of those like black box deals where Git was very complicated. It's come a long way as far as usability, but it's still complicated. And the command line version is still not for the faint of heart. But then along came GitHub. And so I have been using GitHub for a while. When did I don't even know if they show when you first sign up for a GitHub account. Got a GitHub account a long time ago. Where else did I have? I have a GitLab account, which I never use. GitHub has been very useful, and considering it's free, I signed up before Microsoft acquired them. Considering it's free, it's something that I would recommend everybody just get signed up, even though it's a Microsoft product now. Because it is so broadly adopted and in use, it's just nice to know how it works. And in some cases, you could actually put it to use for your own needs. Just make some private repos on there for don't put passwords on there, or certainly don't put them on there unencrypted. But if you ever need to save some things, you can even edit files in their graphic user interface and their web browser based tools. They have GitHub Desktop for Windows and Mac, I think. Certainly not for Linux. Why would they run Linux? Yeah. So GitHub has been pretty okay, unless they're stealing your code to create their Copilot product. That's not as good, but there are some downsides. GitHub is owned by Microsoft now, so not ideal. But then VS Code is also Microsoft, and everybody's using that, myself included. So whatever, the more things change, right? So our GitHub presence from the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, so we can get off my timeline since it's such a mess. The Innovate for Vegas Foundation has, and this might be one of the upsides, I guess, to having the resources of a big company. We have the nonprofit team tier, and there are development by street. There are thousands, millions, I don't even know, who knows, of these free. So you contact us regarding your nonprofit. You don't have to be a 501c3. They do, although that makes it much easier. That's sort of an automatic yes. But if you're working on some sort of a open source project, community elevating, high value, like, hey, making this open source and making use of your tools will help everyone. And GitHub is like, yeah, we want to kind of be in on that. But we file, here's our 501c3 determination letter, and the name change was very painless. So when we changed our name to Innovate for Vegas from Code for Vegas, so we got that, among other things, the nonprofit team tier with GitHub and our Google Workspace, for example, free as well. So some nice upsides to going through the mild hassle of becoming a 501c3 public charity. So we have a nice collection of features there at GitHub. The free account is mostly fine for one person, but Teams gives you a few extra, nice things. So the team tier for free is what we have. I don't think we have any private repositories. I think we have like 18 various projects in various states of not quite ready to go yet, as in not really ready to begin development. When we got started, we had, a dozen people maybe showing up to our hackathons every month. That's a high. 15, 12 was the high number. The typical was maybe more like 3 or 4, maybe 2. But we were still getting some traction. It was our first 6 months, first year. But at this point, we're hoping to reach out beyond our local innovation population. And we have now added a couple of organization accounts to the mix. So the Project Act is the most interesting at this moment. So that's another organization that we don't have the free tier on, but it will be mostly, Project Act should not be a heavy development tool project, right? There shouldn't be a ton of development going on. We'll see as it unfolds, and I can ask whether we could be a fiscal sponsor of the GitHub project there and get the team share, whatever we end up needing. So anyway, that's our, I guess full disclosure, we do have free GitHub, so that makes it easier to choose GitHub, I guess. The GitLab is also free, sort of. You can self-host it. So GitHub is sort of the no one gets fired for choosing GitHub choice, I suppose. We can certainly do both. The way Git repositories work, you can have multiple origins. So we could quite literally host in multiple places, and Git would take care of that for us. So we don't have a lot of members in our org at this moment. We used to have the legacy Code for Vegas people in there, but they weren't doing anything anyway. So we're down to like the two original co-founders of Code for Vegas. One person who kind of took over for a little bit when the two people left the state and they moved on for their careers. We have myself. We have fellow board member Mary is also a member of our org. I don't know if everybody's marked as public, so you may not see all these little avatar pictures. And we just added a new board member over the weekend. So we'll add Mr. Dean on there as well. So the entire civic volunteer landscape, a lot of busy traffic on the street today. The civic volunteer landscape does make heavy use of GitHub, as from what I've seen. So making use of tools like Project Act that can interoperate with GitHub repositories and organizations on GitHub is kind of a first or starting point. So we'll certainly be testing these initial projects out that, to find other organizations. We can test it out on our own organization first. So GitHub is sort of like, it's not the only game in town, but it is a more popular game in town. The price is right for us, but there are many options out there. Git is open source software. GitLab you can, again, deploy on your own servers, etc. So there are many choices. So for the moment, we're using GitHub. Now, GitHub has added some of their own wrapper items around it, the GitHub issues, discussions, wikis. They have the GitHub flavor of Markdown. So you can make interesting profiles with pictures, and you could do that with normal Markdown. But they've added sort of the GitHub variant. It makes it really easy to write README files that will look reasonable if someone wants to actually view them as structured or formatted text, not restructured text, but as with headers and subheads and italics and some rich text formatting and so on, tables, etc. So mostly I can't really complain. GitHub has its issues; it has several, but it has mostly been useful for us, and we are now beginning our third year putting the tools to real use. So I've been spending the last few days constructing a workflow to go along with our Agile for Volunteers process using an Agile structure in GitHub issues. Now, this has been done. I've created what they now have are form templates. So they actually have drop-down menus and so on. I've created a themes, epics, features, and user stories hierarchy. Nothing magical, but just sort of a way to guide someone through like, oh, okay, how do I fill in these blanks in this Agile for Volunteers process? Create a theme. Like this is the sort of the part of the overall project that we're going to try to accomplish. Like launch the local side of graph document creation and publication for Project Act. So that might be the first theme. The epic might be developing a command line tool, and then maybe a command, a GitHub action or something that could be run in automated fashion, and maybe some sort of a graphical user interface version. So that could be an epic, and then features fall into the epic. So the epic is basically what we're going to try to accomplish during the next couple of sprints or intervals. Agile for Volunteers defaults to a 2-week interval. Is it interval? Is that the word they use? Or I think iteration, 2-week iteration interval. Either way, 2 weeks. So what are we going to work on for the next 1 or more 2-week sprint periods? Sprint is not always a popular word, so work, interval, or iteration makes more sense. It's not a sprint. We're not running to the end. We're trying to accomplish things all along the way. Features might be loading a local template, querying a project to get some of the data to fill into the template, etc. And then user stories, the traditional, as a project manager, I need to publish information about my project in a description of a project file, and I don't know anything about text. And at the end, I should have a valid DOAP file in RDF XML format. Right, so pretty straightforward. And so I have constructed some forms to do that, starting out with Project Act, and we'll move them over into our various projects and Innovate for Vegas, all open source, of course. Now, unfortunately, here's one of the things with GitHub. They try features out and they're like, oh, this is beta, it might go away. So if you depend on things like the forms, they could always cause problems. Rug pulls are never fun, right? Code for America. So unfortunately, the task list feature, which would enable easily linking, like they would take care of the link checking and letting you know that there are links. It kind of does that, but the full task list feature that would allow connecting different issues and then having that integrated in with their GitHub project feature is in a closed beta, and it may or may not see the light of day. Task lists in this context could be used like themes, and here are the epics that are associated with it, so you connect them within the issue. So this is all inside baseball, maybe a little nerdy, but essentially it allows you to create a kind of a hierarchy of interconnected things, and then as you start finishing them, and then user stories connect to an implementation task, so then you're actually going to write code about it and try to make that user story true for that feature as part of this epic to eventually complete the theme and then move on to the next theme. And these are agile terms, agile project management terms that have made appearances over the years. And theme is sometimes called a initiative, but yeah, these are pretty straightforward. It helps you just group things together, and so you can know what people are working on and what are you working on and what are we trying to accomplish. My favorite thing about user stories, by the way, which are not directly, but they're not completely difficult to add to the mix for GitHub to put them into this issue structure. I have worked at places, I won't say which, but it was a major chip company. We had the specification for a part, and it listed a feature, and I'll tell you right now, it was I2S, I squared S. So a serial, I think I squared S is two-wire serial, just like I squared C. So I squared S is really aimed at audio, and there was a person I'm not going to say we were making a reality show, but maybe something similar. Maybe a contestant was like, hey, is the I squared S feature available on this board? It's listed in the spec. And I said, it doesn't appear to be brought out. So I contacted the mothership and I said, hey, is this on there? And I will never forget this. Why would someone want to use that? So clearly when they were writing their specs, they had no user stories. Like, as a developer using your product according to your specification, trying to design a audio product making use of I squared S, I would hope that signal will be available for use. So I have found the user story model is very usable. Now, should it be the only way that you describe your project? No. Agile is getting a bad rap lately because you should specify your project, have things more defined up front. Don't rely on this rolling user story structure. They go well together. And so that's part of the Agile for Volunteers notion. And so we can make use of the GitHub tools to enable that pretty easily. And the price is right. There are discussions. We can have discussions per repository. We can use the top level overview repository as sort of a project wide discussion. Discussions are just like anywhere else. You make a comment or a tweet, tweeting or whatever. You're like, respond to that. So you can post a reply. Nothing too tricky. So hopefully people who are contributing to a project that are not rabid GitHub or even Git fans will not shy away from the notion of communicating about the project with the people working on it, using a tool that brings the discussion closer to the work. Every time you send someone to Discord or Slack, you're introducing another thing, and that other thing is disconnected. Maybe you have a little app or something that you can connect your GitHub bot, like, hey, a new release was built, I guess. Those can get annoying, but again, price is right, totally free. the big thing that we're focusing on is contributor attribution, so that people who do work on civic volunteer projects, those are the civic volunteers themselves, if they spend time, they put in their energy, they share their expertise and their insights or whatever they do as part of a particular project, they should be recognized. They should have their name. If they want, they can opt out if they want to. They should be able to opt out, but they should be able to say, here's who I am, here's where to find me, and if you want to hire me to work on something, or if you want to give me money for my efforts, then definitely look me up, right? So too often, I have seen civic volunteer projects, as in more than 0 times, civic volunteer projects, the civic volunteers themselves do not always get the proper billing, which should be up at the top. Like, hey, guess what? These people did the work, and then we'll celebrate the project managers and the other, not that those aren't work, but, come on, people that volunteer their time aren't even getting paid. They should at least get the top billing. So the ability to keep track of who's working on what, and I'll tell you, I reached out to that particular, in the case that comes to mind, I said, hey, where's the list of people who worked on this open source project? Because there was an announcement and it only featured paid employees of a particular organization that recently discontinued their brigade program. And they said, oh, it's so hard to keep track of. We'll have to look that information up and so on. That's like, we have volunteers working on it. That was not a surprise. They should have been keeping track of that stuff. And the people that did the work should get the credit, not the people who got paid to tell the people who volunteered what to do. So one of the ways we're going to be focusing on the use of GitHub is the simple matter of keeping track of who works on what, and so they get proper attribution. And this will always be a work in progress to make it easy and make it highly visible and so on. But a nice thing about if someone doesn't really have a website, or they have a Facebook, like, I don't want to really have people checking out my Facebook page if they're working, or you can send them to LinkedIn maybe, but if they're not signed in to LinkedIn, then they can't really see. And what if you just sign up for GitHub? You're part of the project management process. You have a place to point to, and your GitHub profile, you can point to LinkedIn if you want, but you would always be findable in the project universe. And so we're kind of encouraging people to at least have an account on GitHub. And I'm not a fan of like forcing the use of a platform like this, especially Microsoft, but the utility is there. And for the time being, it works, it fits into our budget, etc. So I do not take it lightly, but it is sort of a necessary evil for the near term. One nice thing about GitHub in general, it is reasonably well known. It's not a name that would raise eyebrows, like, oh, we have a project on GitHub? Okay. Not a huge surprise. Open source development for all to see is a fundamental component of civic volunteer efforts. So you can always go and check out open source projects being developed by civic volunteer organizations. That's pretty much the norm. And you can often find them on GitHub. And we hope to open the floodgates a bit with Project Act to enable the connection, communication, and collaboration between different organizations who may now not have a way to easily communicate when your communication tools get pulled out from under you. That's why I don't like relying on third parties totally. But in this case, the reason was not, it was a different party. It was the party pooper that rug pulled everybody. But if you're unable to connect, if there's one person maintaining a spreadsheet, and it becomes a human, not in a bad way, but a bottleneck, right? Like, oh, one person is responsible for this. You can search through internet history and internet lore about one person updating a host file, or one person managing a list of domains for mail services or whatever it was. So having one person do that in this modern era, especially when these civic volunteer organizations are supposed to be building tools, making projects to improve things, to close gaps, to make things better. So why not do it for the community of civic volunteers, among others? So open projects, open collaboration, open communication. People who are interested in working on community elevation projects should be able to collaborate across, like, oh, sorry, I don't live in Los Angeles, therefore I'm not going to work on a Hack for LA project. but I could help you with that one issue, right? We should be enabling that. Visibility is also important. So not everybody goes to GitHub, and people think that's, it's like sending someone to Pinterest. Like, oh, I'm not really into pictures of things. But in this case, you are looking for this answer, and here's, so it's a question of like understanding the utility, not the tool itself. Like, what do you get for visiting the GitHub project? Oh, you can see the names of the people who contributed to it. Okay. So visibility, though, is important so that local communities can become more aware of the value of open source development, open source projects in the world. Most people don't even know they're using Linux every day, right? And not everything needs to be code, of course. Civic volunteerism should be more visible. People should understand the results of the efforts put in by people. Like, oh, I didn't know that was developed here by this group of people who I see around town. Whatever. You never know. Individuals must be recognized and the achievements celebrated. And of course, people should know to give these projects a try. They should be able to discover the projects and say, oh, this is developed by someone here. I should try it. Maybe it will solve the problems that we've been having with our transit system or access to local information about habitat encroachment or whatever the case may be. They may actually solve real problems. So personal GitHub accounts, by the way, provide an endpoint for attribution. I may have mentioned something like this, but let's say it explicitly. So attribution that can be simple and authoritative without being something like LinkedIn or Facebook, which may be oversharing. You want to be associated with a project. You don't want to put out your entire life history, or maybe you don't want to post a LinkedIn profile. Maybe you don't feel like your maybe you don't even have a LinkedIn profile. So you can create this starting point to be found, to be associated with the work you do. And you can have an email address. You can have you can have a visible email address that is obscured, like it's anonymized so that the emails get forwarded to you. So it's a convenient way to participate in projects without having to have a complete portfolio of online presence. It's a good starting point for people just beginning or people who are new to the whole thing. So I'm a proponent of at least creating an account to participate in projects. You don't have to start coding away, but if you want to participate in like language translation or testing or maybe some project management or any of the variety of things that are not sitting down and writing JavaScript or other coding, there's a lot that goes into projects, believe it or not. And some of that stuff should be visible, and you should know who's doing what, volunteering their time, so you can hire them. Finally, I'm going to focus on those non-technical non-technical users one last time, because it does figure into our timeline. Like I've said, we rebooted, much to the chagrin of Code for America, we rebooted Code for Vegas as the Code for Vegas Foundation. And almost on the first day was, I'm not a coder, therefore not welcome, right? And at first I was not offended, but I was like, I was flummoxed. Like, what, really? Is that really the difference? The difference one word can make, I suppose. But it became clear, and especially because Code for America was not something to emulate, if by name. So why don't we just go with, we have our hackathons in the Innovation Center. We're in the Innovation District. When we do that, there is this whole local innovation thing. Vegas really wants to be an innovation hub. It won't be, but maybe an innovation destination. The use of the I word seemed to make sense. So Innovate for Vegas. It's a one-word change, piece of cake. Piece of cake and some paperwork and a filing fee to amend articles and so on. But yeah, so appealing to non-technical participants and contributors of creative work was not the 100% reason, but it was a substantial fraction of the reason we went with the name change. So non-technical people who are not themselves coders by self-identifying or by profession or however you want to look at it, should be welcomed, should feel welcomed, and should be obviously welcome to be a part of the projects we're working on. So even if you're a project manager, project managers, of course, they're not necessarily coders, they're not necessarily like technical, but they may be good at organizing things. that is a skill that not everybody has, and I will raise my hand, but you can't really see it. Project management is like an art. We're asking people who want to contribute to our projects to sign up for a GitHub account, like I said, and make sure they can participate in the project process, even in the discussions or commenting on issues or pointing at their own work. Now, if you are a visual, like maybe you do graphic arts or audio, these are larger files. You wouldn't tend to check in or commit or add to the repository these large video files. Or I'm not going to add a podcast to a GitHub repository. So the ability to link to your work, maybe you want to link to a photo gallery of the deployed project that you did the visualization, maybe you did some artwork, maybe you did some logo design, whatever it is. Because believe it or not, civic volunteer projects they need marketing. They need people to know about them and understand what they do and why they should be chosen over the commercial competitors and so on. Hey, it's a result of effort by people that live around you that care about where you live as much as you do, and people in similar places far away who also care where they live. So the ability to connect contribution to the projects, that people can be recognized and celebrated for their efforts, which are often, all too often, as is so often the case with any volunteer efforts, underappreciated, undervalued, sometimes off the radar. So if we can start by having non-technical, and that's maybe something that they would call themselves, but everybody should be welcome to contribute. Not everybody's going to come by and kick tires. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, hey, I want to contribute. I'm a graphic artist. Okay. I'm a user interface designer, but I use Figma. Although I think Figma has a Git or GitHub integration, I think. Penpot does. You should be using Penpot. But you may not be as technical as you think you should be, but you may be as essential as you actually are to a particular project. So the work you do, the effort that you expend, the expertise you bring, and the creative work you contribute should be held to the same attribution standards that the code is in a traditional GitHub use or Git use case. So the idea is to make sure that people get credit for their work, get recognition, and get jobs or money or some other benefit from the time that they spend. And so GitHub is a project management tool, but also as a tool to connect the effort to the eventual celebration, the recognition, the ability to create a list of like, hey, here are the people that worked on this project, and here's where to find them. That seems very simple, but it can be very complicated. And the longer you wait to do it, the worse it gets. And then you get an answer like I got from before that I mentioned. So along the way, you contribute, your name can be in the contributors file, pointing to your GitHub email address. It's a simple start. For the casual contributor, GitHub is really about information sharing and keeping track of contributions, so we don't leave people out. Other organizations may have done this, as I've intimated. With volunteer time and effort only getting the attention it must get, at the end of the day, this recognition is made easier if we use local tools like this. If we can use a tool like this, get our local people, get our local contributors, and even the non-local ones, get them the credit they deserve for contributing their time and energy to make our communities better. And that's the deal. Real use of GitHub is hard to describe. I'm not trying to make a tutorial here, but you can check out our GitHub organization, especially as it begins to evolve a little bit more. There are links to my personal GitHub account, which I don't really use as much, but I've had it for a long time. The organization that we have, the Innovate for Vegas organization on GitHub, should start to see a little bit more activity. The Project Act organization, which I've linked in our show notes, will probably see the most activity in the next couple of days as we start to roll out some ideas for the discovery, the creation of files that are very similar to RSS files if you're a podcast person or a blogger, standard structured data to share information about organizations and projects and how they interconnect, and we can start to think about publishing a visualization as like a graph or a mosaic, in fact, tiled across the country with location accurate logos and so on, like who's working on what. And we'll build on tools from there. So yeah, Project Act should see a flurry of activity in the next week, coming weeks, I guess. And then ideally the My Muni and Welcome projects on Innovate for Vegas will start to get some attention, at least on the coding side. And that's all I have to say about that. So GitHub is cool. It's not the end all and be all. It could be better. And it's also still a Microsoft product. So there's always the rear view mirror you should be checking frequently to see if they're sneaking up behind you to put your code into their automations and AI. But for the most part, it is useful for what it is. For the price, can't beat it. Even the free individual tier, or if you have a couple of people that want to work on a project, it is super cheap considering the value. It's essentially like a free backup of your code too, which is very handy. If you're a coffee shop warrior, you could be working at home and then you go to the coffee shop and you pull your latest changes, pull and merge. So you could be just using it personally for whatever you're doing. It's still valuable. So can't beat the price. Utility is high. Owner of company, questionable. And that's about it. So don't forget to check out our website. And I will remind you, while I'm not soliciting for donations, even though I did just resubmit, I guess we have to every year with our filings, our statement of intent to solicit for donations. So that's on file with the Secretary of State. Our fiscal year ended on the 30th of June. So I filed on the 29th, I think. So we are a 501c3 public charity. We can be found in the exempt organization database with the IRS if you're curious. I have the legal rundown of our timeline of formation and renaming and so on in our GitHub. If you go to our GitHub organization, you can find a link to the legal page that has the bullet list of where to find us in the database, where to find us on Silverflume in Nevada, etc. So yeah, all the stuff, pretty transparent. It makes it super easy to throw up versioned pages. You can see, if I change something, you'll be able to see the history of the document, etc. It's like a wiki in that regard. So all of our stuff is there. If you do want to support our efforts, feel free. We have donation links and so on, and we'll see where we go. I think we received $38 in donations for our second fiscal year. So we're off our $150 high from the first year. But ideally, as we start rolling out some usable projects, we'll have another donate button that people can click and connect that with some utility. And then ideally, a value for value proposition will connect eventual commercial deployments they won't have donate buttons. They'll be sort of like the WordPress model, so open source, but deploy for commercial purposes. And contributors to our project will hopefully derive some benefit from those deployments. And that is our value for value model that I've been talking about for 2 years now. And that is where I will leave today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, Innovate for Vegas Foundation. I'm your host, Managing Director Dan Hugo, for the third year, which commenced yesterday, of our journey to make our smart city smarter. Thanks for listening.